Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second panel of today's LNG to Power Forum for the Asia Pacific region. The theme of this panel will be the evolving electricity generation fuel mix in Asia. 5 years on from the historic signing of the Paris Agreement on climate change in 2015, countries, companies, and even continents are starting to take seriously the need to put in place urgent action to mitigate climate change. There are many who believe that the COVID-19 pandemic has increased the urgency of this imperative, with Build Back Better having become a rallying cry around the world. For many of the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, the climate challenge is magnified by a very heavy dependence on coal. This is especially true in the two largest countries, China and India. But many countries in the region depend to a greater or lesser extent on coal to meet demand for energy in general and electricity generation in particular. For some countries, Japan being the best known example, uncertainties around the future of nuclear power exacerbate the challenges. Where nuclear electricity generation does not materialize as expected, or in countries which decide to phase it out, the gap left by nuclear power is especially hard to fill because it's a zero carbon energy source and also a dispatchable source of electricity. Many countries have begun to turn towards renewables, such as wind and solar power. Ambitious targets have been set, especially in India and China, as the costs of renewables have plummeted. But variable renewables bring their own challenges. They require backup energy sources that can be quickly and reliably ramped up because of their intermittency, and they need synchronous sources to help provide grid stability. These needs present a major opportunity for natural gas, and especially LNG, given that many of the countries in Asia Pacific are short of inter-regional gas pipelines. Unlike in Europe, where the pressure is on to decarbonize molecules to hit a 2050 climate neutrality target, the fastest, most effective, and arguably cheapest route for coal-dependent countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions is to switch from coal to gas wherever possible. China initially pursued such a policy to win back blue skies by addressing appalling air pollution, especially in its major cities. More recently, Xi Jinping has announced China's intention to be climate neutral by 2060, with profound implications for the share of gas in the country's energy mix. India, too, is pursuing a policy of boosting the share of natural gas in its energy mix to a target of 15% of primary energy by 2030. However, if gas and LNG are to fulfill the potential that many see in Asian electricity generation over the coming decades, much will depend on price. Demand will only grow rapidly if gas and LNG remain affordable and therefore competitive, with no return to the sky-high prices that prevailed in the first half of the 2010s. To discuss these issues further, I would like to introduce four panelists, all based in the Asia-Pacific region, who are experts in their fields. We have Kaushik Roy, who is Vice President of ExxonMobil Gas India, based in New Delhi. Akihiko Taniguchi is Executive Officer for Global Partnership at JERA. He is based in Tokyo. Anand JNS is Senior Vice President at GE Energy Financial Services, based in Singapore. And Don Lam is Co-Founder and Chief Executive at VinaCapital, based in Vietnam. We'll get this session going by asking each of the four panelists to give a 2-minute presentation on their particular view of the subject of this panel, starting with Kaushik Roy. Kaushik, the virtual floor is yours.
Hello, Alex. It's great to be part of this panel. So ExxonMobil estimates that the global electricity demand will grow by an astounding 60% by 2040. And given its size, all viable energy sources will be required. The mix of those energy sources, however, has changed over time and will continue to evolve based on technological advancements, as well as societal and regulatory needs. As for India, it needs to pursue all sustainable energy solutions. So renewables will play a key role in rural communities where energy infrastructure is currently lacking. For urban areas, natural gas will cater to a big share of the demand. As a company, ExxonMobil is convinced that the role of natural gas is bound to increase significantly in India's future energy system. Natural gas is especially well suited to drive a more flexible and sustainable power system. We are all aware of the cleaner burning profile of natural gas, which produces 60% fewer GHG emissions than coal in utility scale power generation, while emitting significantly lower pollutants. So natural gas is a fuel of choice to pair with renewables to provide strong grid reinforcement and stability. So therefore, it is not just an ideal source of baseload power, but also a clear partner to supplement intermittent renewables such as solar or wind, ensuring reliable power when renewables may not be able to be available at scale. So with that, I conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaushik. Okay, Akihiko Taniguchi, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Akihiko Taniguchi, JERA Japan. It is my great pleasure and honor to have a chance to speak virtually at this LNG to Power Forum 2020 today. Let me first introduce my company, JERA, briefly. JERA is a joint venture of Tokyo Electric and Chubu Electric, consolidating their fuels and thermal power generation businesses of Japan and overseas. JERA is the largest power producer in Japan, supplying about 1/3 of electricity demand of Japan. JERA's annual transaction volume of LNG is about 35 million tons of a year, one of the largest LNG players in the world. Our business covers vertically integrated value chain from upstream, such as LNG production, transportation, and trading, to downstream. As Alex pointed out, we are absolutely facing pressure on coal and nuclear uncertainty in Japan. Having said that, we released last week JERA CO2 Zero Emission 2050 with a roadmap 2030 in Japan. JERA will achieve zero CO2 emissions through a combination of renewable energy and zero CO2 emission thermal power generation. First, JERA will fade away inefficient coal thermal power plants by 2030. Second, in generation area, we increase the adoption of renewable energy supported by thermal power generation, especially LNG thermal power, capable of generating electricity regardless of natural conditions. In this context, LNG remains to play a very important role in achieving zero carbon society with the stable supply of energy and affordability. Third, in fuels area, JERA will promote the adoption of greener fuels and pursue thermal power that does not emit CO2 during power generation, such as ammonia and hydrogen. The point is how to make such a transition in an affordable and practical manner. We call this approach smart transition. Thank you for your attention. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Akihiko. We now move on to Anand JNS. Anand, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to my co-panelists and everyone else who is joining us live on this very important virtual conference. I would briefly start out by contextualizing how we at GE and more particularly G Energy Financial Services, which is the investing division of G for the energy sector, how we look at the evolving electricity fuel mix scenario in Asia Pacific and more broadly globally as well. Just before I start, our vantage points of looking at this particular topic is two things: from a technology perspective and the financing. As you all know, G is a premier provider of the technology for electricity generation industry, from gas power to renewables, nuclear, hybrids. So we have a certain view and a certain dimension on what is driving the fuel mix from technology side and what's behind that. So as we look at it, we see four very important, equally important but competing set of drivers that are shaping the whole discussion around the fuel transition that's taking place. The need for affordable electricity, the need to address the global warming, and we have the need to address the air quality issues. And then from a technical standpoint, you also need to address and ensure you have a reliable and stable grid that can withstand any of these exotic technologies that we're going to place on the grid. All these four are very important, equally important, but they place contradictory challenges on the choice of the technology and fuel mix. So number one is the context. I just wanted to lay it out there. And the second thing is from a financing standpoint, again, as I mentioned, we are a seasoned global investor in the energy sector. We've had exposure to about 50 plus gigawatt of thermal projects in our portfolio. So what we see from that standpoint is from the days of investing in thermal being a very cool thing to do to now we are seeing a situation where increasingly institutions and insurers and even corporations like ourselves, and of course, JERA, as Akihiko-san also mentioned, increasingly institutions and corporations are committing to certain carbon neutrality commitments, right? This is a very important trend which is taking place that's going to move the capital and financing away from the so-called polluting sources of electricity to cleaner. So with these two macro trends from technology side and the financing side, how do we see the world shaping up? We see, I think it's but inevitable that renewable power will be the most dominant fuel in the electricity mix globally. And also in Asia Pacific increasingly because it's being driven by China and India on a very large scale. And then gas will have to continue to be a major component of this transition to provide the reliable and base load. So there is a role for gas and a very important role without which this transition would be incomplete. That's how I would summarize, and I would look to explore each of these topics in a bit more detail as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anand. Now we move on to Don Lam. Your thoughts, please.
Well, thank you, Alex, and good morning to everyone. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this important panel. Just a little bit about VNET Capital. We are the largest investment firm based out of Vietnam. Our main investment focus is just Vietnam. We're currently managing over $3 billion. And we are just recently looking into the energy sector, only essentially less than a year ago. Vietnam with a growing population of almost 100 million people with an annual GDP around 7%, electricity demand is growing about 10% plus a year. So Vietnam is facing a growing power shortage. By 2024 or so, there's estimated we'll be short of power around 2024. So there's a big rush to do something. Now, the government of Vietnam will issue a range of supportive policy, mainly in favor of tax scheme and investment support to promote development of cleaner energy, including renewable. And as Alex said earlier, or someone said earlier, renewable is great, but it's just not sustainable without something more stable like LNG. This is one of the reasons why the government have also pushing for investors to look into this space. As little as 2 years ago, 2/3 of the new power output from Vietnam is looking like coming from coal-fired power plant. But as recently as a few months ago, when we look at these things, there are more than 15 new LNG plants being proposed to the government master plan. So essentially, the Vietnamese government now is looking at how to learn the lesson that was China did some time back, where getting away from coal into more cleaner energy, including the LNG to power. I'm looking forward to discussion of this particular space. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I have some prepared questions for our panelists, but I would also like to invite delegates to submit questions via the chat box. And hopefully we'll be able to present some of those to the panelists too. My first question is to Kaushik Roy. Kaushik, India, well on its way to becoming the most populous country in the world at some point during the 2020s faces many challenges, not least in energy. Unlike China, which has reached its objective of creating a, quote, moderately prosperous society, India still has a lot of poverty to address, and that has to be balanced against any move towards large-scale decarbonisation of energy. What's your assessment of the government's energy policy, and what opportunities do you see for gas to power in the country? Kaushik, you need to unmute.
Sorry, I was blabbering to myself. I'll take the two questions. So let's talk first about the government policy. So India, as we know, is growing, and energy from all sources would be required to support that growth. So the government recognizes this. And while it is ambitious about renewables, it also has a vision of increasing penetration of gas from 6% to 15%, not huge, 15% in the energy mix. Natural gas has a long-term future in a low-carbon environment, which we know can further be improved if it is coupled with newer technologies, carbon capture and storage, for example. So we think that the government is investing, and it needs to invest in boosting the gas infrastructure. And I think additionally, we need to recognize that gas needs to get parity with other fuels on the tax front. So you can't have different fossil fuels being taxed differently to improve market efficiency. So that's kind of on the government side. So if you talk about gas in power, we recognize, and everybody recognizes, that energy needs to be affordable for every Indian. And in order to make it affordable, it is not just supplying more natural gas, but doing it in a way that is more flexible, that drives down cost and barriers to adoption, and it can be used in different spheres where gas can go into. So natural gas, we know, is very suited for flexible and sustainable power system. We talked about the cleaner burning profile of gas. I want to highlight that ExxonMobil has jointly researched with prominent think tanks in India, like TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute, then CEEW, Council for Energy, Environment and Water, and these were published last year. And the study found that on a life cycle basis, gas-generated power emitted 54% less GHGs than domestic coal. And for us, these are encouraging results. Natural gas pairs with renewables to provide strong grid reinforcement, stability, and gas for power generation provides 2 times the grid momentum of coal and takes minutes to start versus hours for coal. So natural gas, we think, is a source for baseload power and a partner to supplement intermittent renewables. This can benefit, of course, the broader penetration of renewables into India's energy mix. So that's kind of our view of gas in power.
Thank you very much, Kaushik. I'd like to turn now to Akihiko Taniguchi. Several years ago, the Japanese government and METI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, published ambitious targets for the energy mix in Japan by 2030, with coal and nuclear both playing large roles. Can you summarize what the situation now is in Japan, especially now that you have new leadership, when it comes to policy about the energy mix? Do you see a move away from coal? And can you also comment on where nuclear is in Japan at the moment?
Thank you for the question, Alex. That is quite timely. I do not know if it is true or not, but today some Japanese newspaper article says that Prime Minister Mr. Suga will announce new environment target of net zero GHG emissions year 2050 next week. Talking about the current energy strategy, it was made in 2018. Such strategy is reviewed almost every 3 years, and METI announced last week that the government started discussions on the review. Such a review will be conducted in accordance with Prime Minister's announcement. Japan's current target of GHG reduction in 2030 is 26% reduction in comparison with that of 2013. in accordance with Paris Agreement. The current strategy says that in the energy mix, renewable energy accounts for 20–24%, nuclear 20–22%, thermal power 56%. With regard to coal, Minister Kajiyama in July this year announced introducing system for fading out of inefficient coal power plants by 2030. There are about 140 coal thermal plants in Japan, and more than 110 are classified as inefficient. Of course, coal has a problem, but it is currently evaluated as a fuel for an important base load power supply because it involves the lowest geopolitical risk and has the lowest price per unit of heat energy among fossil fuels. Renewable energy, such as solar and wind power, emits no GHG and expected to play a key role in the energy mix. But the output is intermittent, dependent on natural conditions, and currently needs to be complemented by thermal power generation, as everybody pointed out. With regard to nuclear power, there is no GHG emissions, but the situation is still uncertain, subject to public acceptance. In the current energy mix, nuclear is expected to account for about 20%. That is, maybe 20 or more nuclear power plants are required. But currently, not so many plants have restarted operations. I hope the new plan will draw a more clear picture. The gap should be filled by thermal power plants, especially LNG, and such uncertainty makes LNG demand forecast very difficult. We continue to closely watch how the discussion is on new strategies going on. This is my observation. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Anand, a question for you. Your company is involved in the development of energy projects in numerous countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Given the insight you must have gained from this, what's your assessment of the gas-to-power opportunities across Asia-Pacific over the coming decade, especially in emerging economies, given the growing pressures to reduce dependence on coal? And what are the key drivers of these opportunities?
Sure, thanks, Alex. Let me start out by quoting or stating a few facts or numbers here that will kind of give a proper context to this. So today, Asia Pacific or broader Asian region accounts for 50% of global primary energy consumption, maybe even more, but at least 50% of global primary energy consumption. This is expected to grow by another 50% by 2050. So we are looking at about 1.6% annualized growth rate in this energy consumption. This is being driven by population growth as well as economic growth, even while these economies mature and the energy intensity of the economy itself is going to decline. Just to contrast this scale of energy transition which is going to take place, in Europe is expected to contract its energy consumption during the same period. And Americas are only going to grow about 0.5% or so in the same period. So now we are looking at the scale of energy evolution is so huge in Asia compared to the rest of the world that we have certain very unique demands here in Asia. Second point I would also make is that as the energy consumption is going to continue to rise, we are also going to see increasingly greater renewable penetration in the electricity grids and greater number of countries coming out with voluntary commitments towards carbon neutrality. We just had China announce it. And as Akihiko mentioned, Japan is going to expected to come out with it. And we have other countries like Australia, South Korea. They all have plans to achieve some level of carbon neutrality. What does it mean? The heavy renewable influence, and then you have the carbon neutrality commitment is going to put a lot of pressure on the base load, strong base load generation. That role can only be filled by gas. So what I would like to firmly state is the case for gas could never have been stronger than it is today. Now, how do you go about it? So the way we see it's going to evolve here is there is going to be a push for greater coal to gas switching across Asia. We are seeing this trend already taking shape in countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, China is going to go down that path because China is committed to achieve the peak carbon emissions by 2030 and then go completely carbon neutral by 2060. So we expect it can only happen by way of coal to gas switching. And Taiwan has recently awarded a pretty large gas power plant it also to gradually replace coal power plants starting 2024. And incidentally, it's going to be powered with the GE technology. We also see nuclear to gas switching happen, especially South Korea and Taiwan are increasingly committing to phase out nuclear as well. So I would say in terms of opportunities for gas power investment or LNG supplies in Asia, there is a stronger case. We see roughly 100 gigawatt at least of gas powered deployment that's going to take place over the next decade in Asia. So I would say there is a huge opportunity in all these countries, whether Vietnam, Bangladesh, Thailand, South Korea, Taiwan, and as Kaushik mentioned, India holds a lot of promise. It needs to sort certain fundamental economic issues to give further boost to gas power deployment. But overall, we see a lot of opportunities for gas power deployment in LNG consumption.
Thank you very much. Right, a question for Don Lam. Your company, VinaCapital, describes itself as one of Vietnam's leading investment management and real estate development firms. What is your involvement in energy development and what opportunities do you see for gas to power, or more specifically, LNG to power, both within Vietnam and elsewhere in the surrounding region? Don, can you unmute?
I just did. Thank you. VinaCapital started to look into the sector over a year ago, mainly because the government have made this as a key focus point in priority as Vietnam energy consumption grows significantly over 10% a year. And we expect even more as more and more factories are moving out of China, and many of those are heading toward Vietnam. So industrial energy consumption is increasing very, very significant. And I'm part of the advisory council for the Prime Minister in Vietnam and government in Vietnam. And one of the things that we've been looking at is how to reduce the reliance on coal-fired project over the next decade, and shifting most of that toward more on renewable and LNG. And as I said earlier, with the growth rate that we are doing right now, and with the limited land space, solar power is not going to work for us. Wind, maybe, but not as predictable. So LNG is a key criteria, a key area of growth. That's why we are into this space. So for example, we recently got the approval to build a 3 gigawatt power plant just south of Ho Chi Minh City with GS Energy out of Korea. And this power plant, we are hoping to be operational by 2024. And one of our partner, two key partners working on this, by the way, is GE on the plant side, and ExxonMobil for the LNG side, which we've been in discussion for the past few months. Also, we've been helping a number of large investment group that's looking at investing into the space. And again, our focus is mainly LNG to power, because we think that this is where, with the pricing it is today globally on LNG, with the benefit of cleaner fuel, we are pushing hard for an LNG to power in Vietnam, both in the short and the longer terms.
Thank you. I'd like to turn now to one of the questions that's come in from the delegates. I'm not sure who will want to answer this. I guess Anand, this may be one for you. There's a lot of hype at the moment about hydrogen and decarbonized gas in general. And we have a question here which interests me as well, which is, how feasible is it to convert a gas-fired power plant to hydrogen fuel, or is it possible for the same plant to burn both without much modification?
Yeah, difficult question. Well, let me attempt it with some sincerity. I'm not a technologist, but what we all understand about hydrogen is fundamentally hydrogen is has got a higher heat content. Obviously, it packs a lot of heat within a given mass of hydrogen, but volumetrically it is it's not as dense, right? So you need a greater volume of hydrogen to get the same amount of energy that you need to get out of natural gas, you know, if you're attempting to get the same amount of energy. So it needs every power plant, it needs some amount of retrofitting in terms of the fuel combustion and the fuel mixing system. So what I would think is the mixing of hydrogen with natural gas is clearly on the table. I think there are technologies. GE itself is offering it at a lot of places. So mixing of hydrogen in certain proportions with natural gas is clearly there. It's available. For a plant to go completely hydrogen, I would say maybe that question has to be better evaluated by technologists as to what level of retrofitting is required.
Okay, thank you. Kaushik,
may I comment just one point?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, of course, my company JERA is challenging to convert our natural gas LNG plant to hydrogen power plant in the future. As Anand pointed out, for the time being, if we use the current LNG plant, it's a little bit difficult. Quite a lot of investment is required. But if we have a tailor-made design for hydrogen combustion, that's okay. What we are doing is how to gradually increase the ratio of hydrogen into current LNG plants. And that is our challenge. The biggest problem for hydrogen is cost. As you understand, yeah, there are blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. Both of them are very expensive. That's all.
Okay, well that leads very neatly on to another question from delegates. In fact, the question is more of a comment, really. That green hydrogen is rather further in the future than many realize. I think I would support that. And so there's a need for full life cycle costs. Can any of you panelists give us some idea of what the energy and environmental impact is of large-scale deployments of green hydrogen? Okay, right. A little bit of uncertainty there.
There are plans afoot to develop and produce large-scale green hydrogen. I mean, projects are being conceived. We hear these projects being conceived and being developed in the making in Australia, for example. I think is there a hydrogen production that is about to take place, the green hydrogen production? I think these projects are yet some years away from taking the financial shape. So one of the projects that we are aware of in Australia is talking about getting to financial close like 2025. So that's like still some number of years away, right? So it is a reality. It's going to get there as it's going to be a function of the costs of the capex. It's going to get there eventually, but I think it's still 4 or 5 years away, is how we see it.
Okay, thank you. We're into our final 5 or 6 minutes here, so I'd like to ask you all to answer the remaining questions as concisely as you can. First of all, a question for Kaushik Roy. Gas in general and LNG in particular seems to have entered a prolonged period of relatively low prices. How much of a difference does that make to the prospects for natural gas and LNG demand in India's power generation sector? Fairly briefly, please.
Yeah, sure. So, of course, how long such low prices will last is anybody's guess. However, we all have seen in 2020 that gas penetration in power generation did go up, potentially replacing some of the coal used in baseload power. But in addition, if one considers the cost of externalities, i.e. greenhouse gas particulates emission, the gap between gas and coal will further reduce. But for the time being, we think that intermittent renewables such as solar or wind may be the low-hanging fruit for gas to partner with, so that reliable power can be available when renewables may not be there at scale, which will, of course, as we go through time, will help in broader penetration of renewables into energy mix of India.
Thank you. Akihiko, question for you. The LNG Producer Consumer Conference, organized every year by Japan, has just taken place, I believe, a week or two ago. What were the key themes of the event? And can you give us a quick summary of what emerged from the discussions? You need to unmute. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Alex. Let me briefly summarize the conference. The conference took place last week on Monday, and it was 9th anniversary. And it was a good opportunity for both producers and suppliers, consumers, and stakeholders exchange views. There were two main themes. The first one was a price mechanism, favorable and sustainable for both producers and consumers of LNG. And the other one was a decarbonization through the LNG value chain. Both of them, the point is how we can make the LNG as a fuel of choice, enhancing its attractiveness. Especially the first one, the price. What was discussed was the necessity or requirement in Asian LNG market, that is Asian LNG market index. Without such an index, it's difficult to further develop the LNG market in Asia because transparency and liquidity in the current LNG Asian market is lacking. The other point for decarbonization is we talked about we need to pay more efforts to decarbonize all the value chain from upstream to downstream of LNG. And one important and interesting topic was so-called carbon neutral LNG. All the producers are trying to decarbonize with carbon credit or something. But such an effort is facing a challenge because the system of carbon credit is different country by country. And the big problem is who pays the cost. Thank you. That is my comments.
Thank you very much. Right, we're into our last few minutes here. So I'd like to turn to Don Lam. I don't think we could really bring this session to an end without some mention of the COVID-19 pandemic. So Don, what has been the impact of the pandemic on energy investment opportunities in Vietnam? Do you expect the impact to be short-lived or long-lasting? You need to unmute.
Thank you. Actually, the Vietnam government have done a fantastic job in containing COVID-19. And so the economic growth, we're actually expecting a positive growth this year, about 3%. So you look at specifically for Vietnam, the impact is short terms. There are a significant number of investors still looking at investing into the LNG to power space. Mainly if they're looking toward when the COVID-19 is sort of finally over, more and more factories are still coming this way. And because of COVID-19, a lot of the manufacturers globally have realized that they don't have a global supply chain, but a China-dependent supply chain. So this really helped with the pandemic. They can realize that, and now that's why some of the factories are moving towards Southeast Asia, and Vietnam is one of the key destinations for it. And with that, we need more energy. And with that, with the government of Vietnam today focusing more on clean energy, so I see that the opportunity is very significant going from LNG to power. So to answer your question, the impact is short-lived.
Thank you very much. Right, that brings us to pretty much to the end of our allotted time. It's a shame that we didn't have longer. I think we could have done with another 40 minutes really to discuss these themes further. Thank you very much to all four of you for the insights that you've brought to this session. Kaushik, Akihiko, Anand, and Don. We now move to, I think it's a 20-minute break so that people can get themselves a coffee and so on. Those of you who are interested, particularly in India, there's a pre-recorded session with some researchers from ExxonMobil and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology that is now available. If you'd like to watch that, now would be a good time to do so. Thanks again to the panelists, and I'll see you again shortly for the third session of this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.